For this video, I'm going to show you how I turned my biggest fail, this is cooked, bro, and turned it into my greatest build to date. Now, I started this project all the way back in October of 2025. My original plan was to cut down denim trousers, get rid of any thick stitching, and then re-sew them back in a rectangle shape. For the wooden frame, the plan was to deconstruct and restore an oak cabinet that I found on Facebook Marketplace. The oak from the cabinet was still in good condition, however it would involve doing some patch repairs for where the drawers used to be. Even though it takes a few extra days, I think it's worth restoring materials like this. Most of the time, wood from old furniture is still in good condition and can be used as normal. For the patches, I'm going to be using offcuts from the same board to match both colour and grain. Now that we know everything fits properly, we can move on to gluing up and then removing any excess material. Here's where the doubt of the project starts to kick in. While the patches weren't horrible, there was still a slight glue line between each one. I decided to put those thoughts aside and we're going to move on to making the mould for the epoxy. Everything was coming along pretty nicely so far, apart from when it came time to do the actual pour. I had done this part once before on a smaller sample to make a denim hatchet, so I came into this feeling pretty confident, however that confidence faded very quickly. A combination of not using enough epoxy, not spreading it out enough, and not clamping it properly led to an improper fusion in the layers. Right on my hand. Now, aside from dropping the mould on my hand, I thought I had had a successful pour, but it turned out to be the complete opposite. Nice. I don't think I used enough epoxy. This is a complete failure. It's been about an hour since the last clip. I've removed a lot of material and I think it's safe to say this is cooked, bro. Oh, you could hear the defeat in my voice clip by clip. I decided to come back 3 months later and decided to go all out on materials. I bought a solid walnut board, proper sheets of denim and better epoxy for the job. Altogether, the materials set me back around £620, which doesn't sound too bad for a woodworking project, but I am financially cooked because of it. Anyway, here I'm getting the rough dimensions cut using this thingamajig, not overly sure what it is, and then I'm using a rotted board as a track. It will become more apparent throughout the video that a lot of the techniques I use are not ideal, but they work just as well. For the top and bottom part of the frame, which is where the track's going to be, I'm using walnut. And then for the back and sideboards, I've gone with quarter sawn oak to add some contrast with the walnut. The oak came from a better cabinet that I found on Facebook, and some people will have their prejudgment on upcycling oak. However, the medullary patterns on this were too good to pass up. Here I'm cutting in a 15mm lip so that there's a bit of overhang on the front side of the cabinet. This will ensure that there's no gap in the final glue up. For the back panel, I'm going to be gluing up these oak boards. There's no real need to add a domino or a biscuit, as these are going to be stuck into an inlay. Now that we've got that clamped and glued up, we can move on to the walnut inlay. The guide for this router isn't exactly the best, so I went through mil by mil and then notched in the back by hand. Once we know that that all fits up properly, we can move on to the lighting fixture. I decided on going for this removable and rechargeable kitchen underlight. I was heavily debating on going for a wired LED strip, however, because the door wraps around the back, I couldn't think of a way to conceal the wire. I picked these up off Amazon. They were relatively inexpensive and don't need to be charged very often. To make the light more accessible for when they do need to be interchanged, I'm just going to quickly notch in these finger holes. Since the rough frame of the cabinet is now coming together, we can move on to doing the denim door. Okay, so we're redoing the door. I decided to order in denim sheets this time. Light, medium and black. The idea is I'm going to roll it on here, put it on there, and then once I've got all the layers done up, I'll put the top on, clamp it down, and leave it for a few days. Kind of maxing out my workshop at the minute, using my bandsaw as a prop for that board. Not ideal. I really didn't end up filming a lot this time, as I knew I was going to be on a bit of a time crunch with the epoxy set off time and the amount of layers that I need to do. I ended up letting it set in the mould for about a week. The set time on the epoxy says 3 days, but I thought it'd be better to play safe. One tip I would recommend if you plan on using a mould for epoxy pours is adding tape to the inside, as it allows it to just pop off. It worked. It worked this time. Looks like we had a successful pour this time. The fact that it's got that sheen to it shows that the epoxy went all the way through the denim. Nice. And we're back to using this weird track saw. I'm using it to cut the top and bottom close to their final height. Because this power tool isn't very good, I need to take it out chunk by chunk and then do that for 3 separate runs. Once again, not ideal, but got to work with what you got. This is where having better equipment would really come in handy. What would normally take 20 to 30 minutes on a table saw took me 8 hours of setting up and cutting each strip. The blade of this thing builds up a lot of heat, so to prevent the strips from warping after I've cut one out, I'm clamping it to a flat board until it cools down again. Once I've got all the strips cut out, I can bring them down to their final width, and then I will be re-clamping all of them until they're completely finished. Here I'm using a frowned upon move called hammering in a screw. My older brother, being a tradesman, felt so appalled by watching this that he went out and bought me a DeWalt drill set. Don't want to hear anyone spitting shade on DeWalt. It is personally my favourite brand and I am very thankful for the gift. Anyway, now that we know that the basic frame works, I'm going to add a wedge so that we can tighten down the strip. Then I'm going to move on to taping the sides of the strips so we can reintroduce epoxy. The main idea behind this is that it will reinforce the strips and it will also match the front when that is eventually recoated as well. I came back 2 days after doing the epoxy and now we have to remove the tape and then chisel down the high spots. I forgot to record the sanding, but I also sanded it up to 320, ready for the glue up. Now that the general idea for this denim door is starting to come to shape, I'm going to route in a 5mm lip, which will leave me with 15 more mil to sit in the track that goes around the cabinet. After doing a bit of research, I found that a 3-inch radius is the best for 15mm strips. So I'm going to make a template that accounts for that and for the router guide. If I had to do this part again, I would not use double-sided tape. I would instead opt for tape and super glue, as the double-sided tape got a lot of residue stuck to the walnut. Just like the side inlays, I'm going through layer by layer, only taking off a few mil each pass, as I don't want to risk binding and splitting on the corner. As you can see in this clip, we have quite a lot of excess on the front corners, so I'm going to be cutting those off also on a 3-inch radius. I debated quite a lot on what to do for the edges and corners. In the end, I settled on going for a round over instead of a 45, and my reasoning is purely based on vibes. I wanted the liquor cabinet to feel mellow and inviting instead of sharp angles and it looking all rigid in the end. The idea for the liquor cabinet was that it would sit on a pre-existing kitchen unit or another standalone cabinet for easier access. So I'm routing all the edges and corners apart from anything that's at the back so that it sits flush with the wall. Now that we've got all the major routing parts done, I need a way to put the denim door in and to be able to take it out if it ever needs to be serviced. My original plan was to route out the entire back, however, I came across a video by Ben Adams Furniture where he removed just a small notch and then filled in the dead space. Because this cabinet is going to be sat against the wall, I didn't see much point in adding a full back panel. So I've attached the small inlay to a walnut strip and then I'm going to fix that into the back of the cabinet. It's always a good idea to pre-drill screw holes, especially on walnut, as it has a tendency of cracking. I also pre-drilled into the back of the cabinet just to prevent any splitting when the screws are going all the way in. Right now the door may not look like much as it's just a black top layer, but I think I'm gonna carve in this design. It may be a bit difficult to see on camera. Yeah, I'm just gonna do like little circle carvings to eat through the layers. Now, this is where the title of the video comes into play. Trypophobia is an irrational fear of repeating patterns. Originally, I had thought that it was a made-up phobia, however, it is actually grounded in some kind of science. Back in hunter-gatherer times, a caveman would have walked up to a beehive to get some of that succulent honey, but they would have been swarmed by bees. That newfound fear that they have developed has been passed down through the ages to where somebody is now having a panic attack over a cabinet. All jokes aside, this pattern had to be one of the most challenging parts of the build. The carving bit would leave deep marks in the wood and later on the denim, to where I had spent a lot of time chiseling it through. After getting all the rough parts chiseled through, I had to hand sand each individual circle. Now I did try a soft foam sand pad, however the pattern is too intricate for the padding to get down into the grooves. So we're back to hand sanding. I think I spent about 10 to 15 hours hand sanding and about 10 hours chiseling. Not too bad. For some reason the carving bit kept ripping the denim layers, creating this like fluffy, fuzzy fabric. It took me around 15 hours of chiseling to get it to look half decent, and then another 12 hours per door to make it look semi-presentable. Here's a closer up shot where you get to see exactly how much damage that carving bit did. By this stage it's still looking quite rough around the edges, but after chiseling and sanding down the fluff, the colours become more defined. In total that process took about 54 hours and it only gets harder from here. After taping off and epoxying each slat, I need to spend roughly 30 hours per door carving the epoxy down back to fabric. My reasoning for this is that some of the circles were quite shallow with epoxy, whereas others were completely flooded. So by chiseling them down to the layer of freshly epoxied fabric, it gives a more consistent look and will save me a lot of time in sanding. I still ended up having to sand around 25 hours per door, going up to 320 grit until I had a consistent finish. I really wish I had found a more efficient way of doing this, because in total I spent around 184 hours of sanding and chiseling by hand. I can't complain too much though, game's a game, and the cabinet turned out really sick in the end. Here's a little before and after of an unepoxied sample with the epoxied door, so all that effort didn't go to waste. Before giving everything its final sand, I want to do something about these filled pits and cracks. The company that I bought the walnut worktop from didn't do a bad job at filling these pits, but they're still quite noticeable. So instead of using a filler to match it, I'm going to pronounce them by using black epoxy. Most of the pits I had to fill are in hidden spots like the underside of the cabinet, so they're never going to be seen. However, there is a small filled crack that looks really nice on the front side of the cabinet. Now, because the cabinet is designed to go on a pre-existing kitchen unit, I'm going to be adding these threaded insert leg levelers to prevent the cabinet from warping over time and to protect the kitchen unit itself. I should mention that this cabinet isn't a commission build. It is currently posted on my website. The link is down below if you are interested. I should also mention that by the time this video is uploaded, I should have a 20% sale on everything on my website, as well as 20% of everything made at the end of the sale will be going to charity. Now that we've got most of the cabinet and the components done, we can give all the wooden parts a water pop. This frees up any wood fibres, which when sanded back leaves a smoother final result. Here's a close-up of those freshly sprayed frayed wood fibres. Once the wood has had a chance to completely dry, we can give it its final sand up to 240. Wood glue has a tendency to not work properly when the wood is sanded to a higher grit, as it cannot absorb completely. So I'm taping around any areas that will be glued and I'm sanding them back down to 120 for a better adhesion. Taping these areas also serves a second purpose. Glue seams usually get a lot of squeeze out, and by taping along the seams it makes it easier to remove any excess that might appear, as well as making those hard to reach corners clean. Okay. Here's where I had to get a bit creative. I only have 2 clamps long enough for the cabinet, so I had to use 2 clamps working off each other. Far from ideal, but for a one-time clamp up it worked pretty well. After about an hour I came back to remove the tape when the glue isn't fully set, but it's still not a liquid either. The tape strat ended up working really well, apart from this complex part on the backboard, so I spent a bit of extra time cleaning up any glue squeeze out. Now we get to do the best part of the build, the oil up and the rub down. Man, that sounds diabolical. For the finish, I went with this wood wax and polish. I wanted more of a matte finish instead of a glossy, as it would have taken away from the carved pattern in the denim. I went with 2 full coats for this finish to provide a better waterproof finish, as well as darkening the natural colours of the wood. I want to say thanks to everyone who's made it this far into the video. If you enjoyed watching the build, please consider dropping a like or follow, as it would go a long way in building this channel. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy the end results.